All right. Welcome to the Santa Cruz Queer History webinar. I'm so excited for everybody to be here. I wore my Watsonville High School colors today. My name is George Kameny, and I will be your facilitator today. These webinars are co-sponsored by the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History and the Diversity Center of Santa Cruz. We hope that when the pandemic is over, that you will visit the mall here in Santa Cruz to see the Santa Cruz Queer History exhibit. And now just for a few ground rules, if everyone could please mute your devices, we will be happy to take questions via the chat tool on the side of your screen. And if we have time, we'll make sure to bring them to our panelists and guests. If you want to hang out afterwards, you're welcome to do so after the recorded session. It's really fun time afterwards to just kind of get to know us and ask any questions we might not have had the chance to get to. This is fairly new to us. We're learning as we go, and we appreciate any feedback that you have. So please feel free to share any of that feedback via www.robdaro.us or the Ma and Diversity Center websites. If you have any ideas for some future stories or local history that we could feature on our webinars, please contact Rob Darrow at robdarrow74@gmail.com. And also, I want to take the time to let everybody know that the Santa Cruz Ma Queer Santa Cruz exhibit is now live online. If you haven't seen it already, I would encourage you all to take a look at it once we're done here. You could go to santacruzma.org/exhibits/queer Santa Cruz. It's a pretty amazing exhibit. It's super engaging. So please check it out. And now for some history. So it's important to outline that there's some parallels in the national LGBT history movement, and that the Santa Cruz County people impacted the national LGBT rights movement. The national LGBT rights movement impacted Santa Cruz County directly as well. UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College both played big roles on the impact that the community organizers had around queer rights in the county. Santa Cruz County is an inclusive and diverse community, which is why we feel that we have this unique opportunity to kind of bring and share these stories to life. To outline a little bit more history, in 1950s, we experienced the Lavender Scare, in which LGBTQ people were removed from government and military service. We saw groups in the 1950s and 60s start to form and organize, for example, the Mattachine Society in LA and the Daughters of Bilitis in San Francisco. In 1966, we have the Compton Cafeteria riots. In 1969, we have the Stonewall riots, which some people will consider to be the beginning of the LGBT movement. In 1974, Santa Cruz organizes with LAGMU, the Lesbian and Gay Men's Union. And in 1975, we have the first Santa Cruz Pride event. In 1970, this is a little bit more queer local history to Santa Cruz. In 1970, we have the first Women's Music Festival in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In 1974, Santa Cruz organizes with the Lesbian and Gay Men's Union. In 1975, we've already celebrated, but it's important to highlight this, the first Santa Cruz Pride event in the county. And then in 1983, AIDS information meeting is held at the County Health Department. And 2 years later, in 1985, we see the Santa Cruz AIDS Project, or SCAP, as most of us will know, founded. And a little bit about why we're here today. So here I'm just sharing some publications and about what we will be discussing, and we'll be exploring the history of how students began to organize in Watsonville High School, and also highlighting an assembly that took place and that I believe is still occurring, called What's in a Name, around anti-harassment and bullying in the school environment. But here you have some publications from 2001 in which Zachary Davenport is featured. The article here on the left, Casual Cruelty, took the community by storm, and we saw other publications start to highlight or shine a light on different LGBTQ student movements that were starting to organize in Watsonville High School and around other surrounding school districts. In our next slide. Sorry. in our next slide, we have some more publications and just some things that were happening around the time that these articles were published. We had GAP, or Gay and Proud, start to meet at Salud para la Gente off campus at Watsonville High School. There's a lawsuit that is filed against PVUSD for not providing a safe learning environment to all students, as well as other surrounding school districts. In 2001, LGBTQ students bring visibility to the tolerance of homophobia within the student body and administration. And then in 2001, we have the first What's in a Name assembly that is held at the Henry J. Mello Center in Watsonville High School. This was a mandatory assembly that all students were required to attend. Before attending, students were required to sign a permission, were required to have their parents sign a permission slip saying that they were allowed to attend a assembly around homophobia. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and begin to introduce my guests and panelists. Today we have Zachary Davenport and Bash De Leon. You're gonna have to correct me on that. Before I introduce my panelists and ask them to share a little bit about themselves, I just want to take a moment and say thank you to both Zachary and Bash, because they, for me, really were pioneers in helping me discover who I am and allowing me the opportunity to discover my sexuality in own person. And so it's just really great to have the opportunity to have them share their story and how they've inspired and impacted so many people within our community. So thank you. And so with that, I would like to start with Zach. If you could please just introduce yourself, and then if you could let us know how you ended up in Santa Cruz County, specifically in Watsonville, please.
So, hello everyone, I'm Zachary Davenport. I was born and raised in Watsonville. My mother also was born and raised in Watsonville, and my dad was actually born in Martinez, California, but grew up in Santa Cruz. And so, yeah, that's, and I now live in San Francisco, and I've been here for about 14 and a half years. Yeah.
And before I pass it over to Bash, Zach, I was hoping you could share a little bit about what the climate was like in attending Watsonville High School and just your experience. Yeah.
Well, I guess I want to start by saying that I'm really happy that Bash is here, because I would not be where I am today without him. I think it's important for me to say that I was really not even sure of what my sexuality was when I started at Watsonville High. I just was so not even on that radar. And Bash and I go way back to elementary school, and we had not seen each other really through middle school much, because we went to different middle schools. But then in high school, we were back at the same school, and Bash was very vibrant, I will say, very expressive, and wearing lots of, colors and bracelets, and had, just beautiful hair. And I just felt so uncomfortable in my own skin, and I just saw him, and I just wanted, I was on the one hand terrified, because I knew that that was a reflection of who I was. But I was terrified to take that leap just yet into expressing myself in that way. And so I just feel it's so important to say that, because without that, Bash introduced me to the Gay and Proud group that met off campus at Salud. And, that was before we had a GSA. It was really kind of like secretive. Like we like, it was off campus, and it was in this, conference room. So I want to say that my heart is is so full right now, especially I'm kind of like emotional thinking about it because I would not be here. I probably would not be here without having experienced my friendship with Bash and um, their courage of coming out our freshman year. You know, I mean, that was like unheard of in 1998, 99. I mean, that, so yeah.
Thank you, Zach. I really love that because like I feel like you really encouraged me to explore who I was and just yeah discover that. So just to kind of tie that to your feelings towards Bash and it's yeah, I was telling Rob earlier I'm super excited to do this webinar. And now I Sebastian Bash, my unsung hero, please if you could introduce yourself and tell us how you ended up in Watsonville specifically, and what was the climate like, and what was your first experience like?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Sebastian. I go by Bash. You can call me either one. But I was born in Watsonville. My mom grew up here. She was originally born in Mexico, and my father was born in Watsonville. And so, I both sides of my family are from this town, and I I grew up here. So this is where I've always been a lifelong resident. At the time, I'm going to go back a little further because I came out in seventh grade, and like Zach said, we kind of lost touch in our middle school years because we went to different schools. There wasn't cell phones back then. We didn't really have the internet like we do now, so there wasn't a real big way to connect and stay connected like we do now. But I do remember Zach being a huge part of my life as an elementary school student. Um, he was the only one in my class that I felt I related to the most. And we shared that even though we weren't old enough to really understand why. I think we both experienced a lot of the same sort of things that, you know, that kids do, especially gay kids experience in school. Um, he was, you know, the sweetest, kindest guy I'd ever met. He was always there for me, and we grew up together in a really important time. We shared a lot of really great experiences in elementary school, and so when we reconnected again in high school, it was a wonderful connection that we had, and you know, we continued to stay as close as we were back then, even as we were getting older. And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to reconnect with him because I definitely don't see him as much as I want to. And I guess for me coming into high school, I started in 1999 as a freshman. And like I said, I had come out a couple years prior, but when I think about when I came out, there wasn't a lot of fear, which I think is a little unique for someone so young. I think what it was for me was I had I had some stuff going on in my home life that really just kind of made me want to rebel. You know, I mean, I didn't have the greatest relationship with my father. Um, he didn't treat me the greatest when I was growing up, and I was named after him. So it was really hard to kind of be in the shadow of someone you didn't really look up to. So a part of my coming out was to kind of like throw it in my father's face and just kind of be as different as I could, because I felt like I was put into this box, and there was a lot of expectation. You know, I mean, I can remember being put into sports that I wasn't into, but I had to do it because I was a boy and he did it. And my dad was a great athlete. He was very masculine. And, you know, as I was developing in my teens, you know, our similarities just started to separate as much as, you know, as much as they did. And I didn't know any other way but to just be me, and to be me to like the fullest extent. And so a part of me coming out was was just kind of dealing with that. And I mean, there was a lot of strength at that time for me to come out so young. I didn't really care, because when your own father kind of doesn't really accept you, you kind of just kind of go, well, then what do I have to lose? You know, if like the one person I look up to as a guy, as a man, the most isn't going to accept me, then I'm on this journey by myself then. And I had to kind of take that leap. And it was hard, but it's what I needed to do. I needed to do that. And it gave me strength to even deal with bullies in school, because I used that same sort of energy to deal with that. And school was so difficult for me. I was a total outcast. I didn't fit in with anyone. No one came out that early. I was absolutely that one gay kid that everyone knew about, that no one really wanted to really hang out with. And so middle school was hard. High school became a little easier, because when I entered Watsonville High, I instantly connected with older students, like seniors and juniors, especially in the drama department, because that's kind of where all of us, you know, crazy kids congregated. And I was taken under the wings of older kids, especially Mark Marquez, who I know Zach knows. He was one of my very good friends. He still is to this day. He was a senior and was someone I looked up to. And so I just naturally kind of gravitated towards them. And, you know, the GAP program was something that I mean, yeah, it was definitely a real secretive kind of group. And we were pulled out of school, pulled out of our class a little before the lunch bell in fourth period. And we were escorted across the street to the clinic. And we would kind of hang out in this like medical clinic little conference room. And it was just a small group of us. And, you know, it gradually got a little bigger, I think, as time went on. I think we had more and more people kind of joining us and getting more involved. And this was right before I think the GSA had been started. But there wasn't a lot of us. There really wasn't. And there wasn't a lot of support. And so the GAP program really did help keep us safe when no one else was, you know, when no one else was doing that. I know that I was mugged a couple times walking home from school. One time it got really, really bad. And if it wasn't for that group, I probably wouldn't have made it through. And just like Zach said, I mean, we needed all the support we could possibly get. And luckily we did get it through that group. And I'm glad that it existed at that time for me and for so many of us. And that's kind of what it was like for me, at least.
Gosh, so there's one really big lesson that I learned from you, and that there's a lot of power, and that it's a big statement in just allowing yourself to be yourself in a sea of people. So I wanted to share that with you, and then also thank you, because this is going to kind of segue into the next question I wanted to ask, and that's around GSA. But you were around before GSA formed, and before I segue into GSA, I wanted to talk about GAP a little bit, because for me, GAP, I only got to attend a few meetings because soon after GSA formed, but the only reason I found out about it was through Zach, and now I'm hearing that Zach had also kind of had found out about it because of you, and I'm wondering if maybe you could shed a little bit of light as to how that program got started. How did you find out about the program? Because it was so secretive, and it was very much kind of kept that way. So if you could just highlight a little bit more about that program.
Yeah, so one thing that did happen for me, fortunately, was, you know, there were certain teachers in particular, obviously Miss Demings back in drama, Miss Montgomery in my math department. These teachers kind of knew that I was struggling. They had seen the fact that I wasn't really fitting in with a lot of other people. They referred me to this really awesome woman. I forget her last name, but her first name was Vivian. And she was kind of like a therapist for me. She would kind of take me in, and, you know, this was during school hours, and I didn't know where else to turn. I was kind of really dealing with my sexuality, my identity, who I was, interacting with other students. I didn't really have a place that I felt comfortable in. And so I was first introduced to Vivian, who worked at the clinic, Salud para la Gente. She worked there. She was right across the street. And I remember she was the one who introduced me to the group. She's the one who made me feel safe. And, you know, that's how I got involved.
Zach, so I learned about GAP through you. If you could share with me your experience with that program, and then if you could also just segue that into how GSA came to be, because I feel like one could not have been without the other, and one happened because there is a big need for us to say, hey, we want to be visible and let people know that we're here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember Vivian well as well, and I have thought about her frequently over the years, and I would love to see her and thank her, because I think she was literally a lifeline for so many of us, and she was probably the first therapist that I really ever interacted with. And, you know, it's just the epitome of acceptance and compassion and just, you know, guidance. And she was a fierce activist as well. I mean, she would call up the school administrators and say like, hey, like, I hear this is happening. And so she was not just like, you know, a counselor. She was fighting on the front lines, and was a big part of that group. And so, yeah, I mean, I cannot actually remember when my freshman year I started going, but there was like a series of events that happened. I actually I stopped going to PE and I did independent study PE because of attacks in the locker room. And then after reporting those to the teacher, I won't name who they were, but I do remember their name. They had me point out the guys in front of the entire class, which I think was like 60 guys, you know, like foaming at the mouth, waiting for me to like name them. So it was not the best, you know, intervention. And so after that, I went into independent study PE, which was fabulous, actually. So that's kind of what happened there. And then the GSA, so GSAs, as you know, as they are now, or as they kind of came to be, you know, they were really starting to like pop up everywhere around, you know, the early 2000s. And I know that groups like this existed in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, like even many, many years before, in the early 90s. And probably even before that, but they were much more underground. And so there was this thing created called the GSA Network, which used to be, I think it's now located in the East Bay, but it was located in San Francisco. And so this was a kind of a center that really provided guidance for high school students. I mean, it was really high school students at the time. Now it's middle school, and probably elementary schools have GSAs now. And so I actually was not part of the forming of the GSA. That happened my sophomore year, and I was not out. I was not even out to myself really fully yet. So the people I remember really being, I know Kristen George for sure was a huge you know, activist in getting that group started. Amber, you know, O'Rourke, a lot of really fierce women were a part of that.
I
And
actually, Zach, I don't want to interrupt, but I have a photo. I
oh,
wasn't going to do this, but I went
go
through, I'm going to
ahead.
share now. I went through a yearbook. This is from 2003,
Yes.
Watsonville High School yearbook, my senior year. And at that point, I believe you had already graduated. So, and if I remember correctly, I think what happened is my senior year, the GSA, there was no GSA page, but we still wanted to have one. So we took content from the previous year and said, you know, just because we're not as active this year, we still want to be present and visible. And so I think that's how you ended up on my senior yearbook. But here you have Zachary Davenport, Karina Navarro, Christy Gallegos, I believe, Jessica Escalante, Kristen George, who uh, at that time was a really big activist and youth leader, and brought a lot of, I think, introduced a lot of these programs to Watsonville as well.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember, but like I know the Radical Fairies and Strange was also starting to kind of come around to Watsonville. And then I also just want to highlight Mr. Hagan,
Oh,
who's
Mr. Hagan.
yes, Jim Hagan, who actually used to allow us to have our GSA club meetings in
Yeah.
his classroom.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. Oh, I miss Mr. Hagan and, Santa Claus, as we called him. Um, so that's kind of what I remember about the GSA. I knew about it, right? And I still was attending GAB off campus, but I was not there yet in terms of being visible. And so, that's kind of, yeah, the formation as I remember it. And again, like, I am not actually the best historian of this particular time, because and I'll say the reason why, because this was such a emotionally laden time in my life that hormones were raging. It was like insanity, and so, and everything happened so fast, and when you're 14, 15, 16, it seems like a year is like 10 years, it's just so much happens in a year period of time. So I'm still trying to piece together, how did this all happen, like years later, because it happened very fast when it did. And I'll get into more of that, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And I want to, I'm just looking at some of the conversation in the chat, and I want to say some people are trying to find out what Vivian's last name is. So we are working on tracking her down. Um, I I was going to segue into what's in a name, but I really think it's important to provide some context as to like the reasons why this assembly was born. Before I go to you, Zach, I was hoping, Bash, and you had already shared a little bit about that, uh, but just being gay, lesbian, queer, transgender, whatever in Watsonville High School, I think was a very mixed experience for a lot of people. And although there was some good, there was a lot of negative. And I don't want to dwell on it, but there was a lot of challenges. And because of that, this amazing assembly, What's in a Name, was created. And so I just want to make sure that we talk a little bit about those challenges and issues. So Bash, if you wouldn't mind sharing, and I know this is a little bit personal, but what were some of the biggest challenges, and why was there such a need for an assembly like this to just explicitly tell people that homophobia is not okay?
Well, I mean, kind of going back to kind of what Zach was saying about even just being in PE as a gay boy back then, that was so traumatic. I can't even, I mean, literally, I can't even explain how scary it was for someone like Zach and I to be in a locker room. I mean, it was just a really scary time. And I remember it got pretty bad for me. And I didn't have independent study like Zach did, but one thing that I do remember doing after a while was I wouldn't get dressed in the locker room with the rest of the students. I was kind of forced to get dressed behind the bleachers in the basketball stadium, like gym. And it wasn't a locker room and there was no one around. It was like, they kind of put me into this separate little spot so that I would be safe. And to their credit, I mean, it was a positive move because I didn't have to be in that environment where guys picked on me or looked at me weird or thought that I was looking at them, and just, you know, I wasn't as alienated. So it was positive in that way, but it also felt humiliating to, you know, have to be alone and to be behind the bleachers. I mean, I remember distinctly what that was like. I was the only one in the entire basketball gym. And when I was, you know, with the rest of the students, they would separate, which I thought was so horrible at the time. They would separate the boys and the girls, and I would be forced to be with all these guys that I didn't connect with, and all the girls that I did connect with were off doing some other activity, and it was really, really torturous for me. And I just remember I would be looking out anywhere else outside of the school and wish I was somewhere else than in PE with all these other boys, because I just felt so disconnected from everyone. I didn't do well. I wasn't motivated. I was in a really, really bad position, and I didn't feel support. I didn't feel like I could thrive. I didn't feel like I could do anything. And it was very similar to how I felt at home at the time. So like Zach said, it was a really, really hard time. It was a horrible time for a gay kid growing up. And I get teary-eyed just hearing Zach talk about it, because I remember it so well. It was a really difficult moment. And I think that's kind of why, you know, that's kind of why GAP was so important for us. And I think, you know, walking home was even harder because, you know, once you were off the school grounds, it's like the school wasn't there to protect you in the small ways that they were trying to. And I got physically assaulted a couple times. And I just, at that point, I think I'd started my first semester as a sophomore, and I got mugged. I mean, really, really badly. And I ended up not completing my high school career at Watsonville. I mean, that was kind of the end for me at that point. And the school kind of understood. I mean, I'd had to be walked to the clinic every, you know, for my lunch breaks. I had to change in the basketball gym by myself. I mean, the school really had no idea how to deal with me. And to their credit, they tried. I mean, they did, but nothing was enacted at that time for an openly gay freshman boy. And, you know, once sophomore hit, all my senior friends graduated, and I was kind of left to kind of exist in this crazy school by myself. And so it was a really, really difficult time. I mean, it gave me a lot of strength in some ways, but it also really hurt in a lot of ways. And one thing that did happen with me, though, that doesn't really happen with a lot of students, was I was given special authorization to attend Cabrillo College for the remainder of my high school career. And so I ended up going to Cabrillo College as a high school student, as a concurrent high school student, which was something that I didn't think that they did very often. And it was kind of a special privilege to do that. And that's kind of why I never finished at Watsonville High. I never got to experience a GSA with Zach, and I never got to have prom, or I never had the opportunity to be in drama anymore, because I just needed to get out of that space. And for me, I feel almost like I wish that the GSA may have started just a little bit earlier, because I might have been able to have continued on in school, but it just seemed so dangerous for me. It seemed just so painful for me. And, you know, looking back at it now, it's like crazy that was so long ago, and and so much has changed. I'm so happy, but it was certainly a dark reality for me when I was there.
I want to take a moment to highlight something that you mentioned, and that there was like a special set of privileges that were allowed to you, and I guess in a sense this was the administration trying to make you feel safe in a learning environment, but at the same time it seems like there was this separate but equal, where at the same time, yes, you might have been felt safe, but then you're also right, you're being separated, or you're um, I want to turn it over to Zach, and if you could just please share about your experience. And again, I know this is really personal, but I think it's important for context. And then if you could also talk about some of those attempts, because I mean, I was there. I'm trying really hard to keep myself separate from this, and it's a little difficult. But Zach, please share.
So about the climate, kind of, and
Yeah, so
yeah.
please, like, I mean,
Hmm.
I know, again, I'm trying to keep myself separated, but one of the things
Hmm.
I will never forget is you used to have this really beautiful Capri. I think it was an Impala. Yeah, I can't.
It was
Uh,
a Plymouth Valiant.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, and it was green, and it was gorgeous. It had leather seats.
Yes.
And I can't remember, but like maybe not even a month after, like, we had maybe taken it out for lunch 2 or 3 times, and like your car got keyed. And to
Yeah.
me, that's just, it was one of the ways where I had seen somebody singly outright get targeted
Hmm.
because of who they were.
Yeah. Yeah, it was spray painted, it was keyed. There were different things that happened to it, but oh God, I love that car. Um, I missed it. I miss it. So yeah, I really was taken back when Bash was talking, because I guess I don't want to remember how bad it was, but it was hell. It was it was like walking into a lion's den day after day. And when you're in school, you have to go to school. So, and so um, it's like it was constant name calling. F this. I won't say the words, but the typical anti-gay slurs, threats to cause harm to myself, um, physical violence, being spit on, having a teacher um, ask another student if I was gay, like very loudly, my freshman year,
I
like
think, Zach, I just wanted to touch on that because that was something that I remember, like, it would really just kind of set me off, and it still pisses me off that there was adults in the room
yeah,
while all of this was happening,
yeah,
and none of them would stand up or say something, and oftentimes when they did, it was the wrong thing.
right.
But
And I want to say that, one thing that happened when, like right before everything kind of had that big shift, before the assembly happened, etc., there was this huge district-wide meeting with like all of the teachers in the Mello Center. Everyone came. The superintendent, John Casey, was there with Catherine Hatch, the assistant superintendent. And teachers were terrified that they were going to be sued by parents if they enforced rules that kept LGBTQ youth safe. I mean, that's how this was. They were terrified of keeping us safe because they didn't want to be labeled as, I don't know. They were just terrified of breaking the law, or it was unclear because it had never really been addressed. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you really summarized really well. I think what was the the perspective, I think, from that specific group of people at that time, because it was very much how I felt, where we're really just trying to protect ourselves legally here and make sure that we're doing the right thing. But it wasn't really about doing the right thing. I I want us to maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe were done in order to help. And obviously one of them was what's in a name. But I also remember you were assigned a cell phone. Um, was there a security guard assigned to you, or a security officer? What can you talk a little bit about the I guess the steps that the school or the administration tried to take in order to make you feel somewhat safe?
Yeah, so I just want to say, the school district, I think they did want to help. They did not know how. They did not know what to do. It was a learning curve for everyone, and and again, I think they were terrified of getting sued. And there was and that article that you showed that said lawsuit filed, there was actually never a lawsuit filed. There probably could have been, but there was never a lawsuit filed because the district took action. So there was a hint of like, if you don't do this, there may be a lawsuit coming. Um, and so how that all happened was my friend Erin Kurtz, actually, who went to Aptos High, she had heard about the Santa Cruz County Task Force. Okay. So she had me go with her, and I told my story there. And there was people there like Stuart Rosenstein and Kate Kaufman, and these, prominent activists that have been committed to LGBTQ youth services and activism for their lifetimes. So I went there, told my story, and they were outraged that this was happening. So they basically asked me, "What do you want to do?" And so together with my mom, with them, and this is after many meetings before this, going to the principal with my mom, with my dad, going to the district, and just nothing really changing. So once we met with all these activists and we drafted a letter and we said, this is what we want. We want a mandatory school-wide assembly to occur for every student at Watsonville High, discussing the anti-bullying and anti-harassment policy and law, and we want this to be done immediately. And then I think we asked for like me to have some sort of way to contact security. So they gave me the cell phone, which never worked, by the way, I just want to say. But that was like 2001. It was like a broken Motorola or something. So that was that. And then what else was, well, I think the big thing was AB 537, which was this law that had just finally passed in the California State Assembly after being turned down by the conservatives in the assembly for many attempts, but finally it was approved in the early 2000s. And so that the timing of that, thank God, because that was like, look, this is the law now. If you don't do this, you're breaking the law. So the law was finally on the side of queer youth. And so that got put into the anti-harassment policy, and it was made clear to everyone. And I just have to say, one thing I learned when I did come out was, and this was like my experience, and I don't know if it was just like I didn't care as much anymore, but I feel like when I was in the closet, it's really when I was targeted, because I was scared and they could smell fear. But when I was out and proud, it was like, yeah, so what? Like, do you want to date or what? Like, what's, yeah, hey. So that was a big difference, and so that's kind of how What's in a Name got started. And then, of course, Mr. Scott, the principal asked Mr. Scott, hey, will you take this on and get, have maybe the students in drama like create this assembly. And so that's how it all kind of started. And really with very little lead time. I think it happened within a couple of weeks after that letter was sent. And
Before
things
we
did change.
Before we dive into that, Zach, and I was going to say, I recall someone saying that they weren't a very good historian. BS. I think you're amazing. You're doing an amazing job, and thank you for providing all of that information, context, not just the names and dates, but your personal experience, and to you, Bash, as well. We are starting to run a bit short on time, so I do want to start talking about what's in a name. Before we go into speaking about the assembly itself, I want to talk a little bit about, I think, just the safety about the environment within drama, and specifically in Watsonville High School. And Bash, I know you got to experience a little bit of that with Miss Demings, who is now Miss Keller. But if you could just talk about, like, I think a big reason why What's in a Name was so successful is because it was put on by a group of students that were really passionate about this and really loving and caring of one another. So if you could just talk about that really briefly.
Yeah, so the drama class at Watsonville High was the only space that we were welcomed and that we felt like we belonged. It really was. I mean, I was the only freshman in the drama class that I was in. Miss Demings gave me special privilege to be there. I remember even after school was over, we'd all kind of hang out. Mark, Donna, Zach, me, Jessica, a bunch of us would just kind of hang out, all of us kind of outcast kids. And so it makes a lot of sense that this wonderful program kind of derived from that department, because that's where we all were. We all needed that one space. And luckily we had these amazing adults to allow us to be exactly who we were without any judgment. And I just remember just having a space to laugh and joke in, which wasn't the norm for any other part of the school. I mean, it was our one little spot. And so yeah, so that's where all of us were.
I just realized I was on mute. Zach, before I pass it back over to you, so I just want to give everybody a little bit of context as to how What's in a Name took place, or how I guess it was formulated. And if I'm recalling correctly, it was the advanced drama class, 4th period, and this was an assignment for them. And then it was also an optional assignment for anybody who is a part of the drama club or the extracurricular activities, and they would get special permission to attend each of those assemblies. If I remember, the assembly was held during 4th period, and it was mandatory for everyone over the course of 2 days to make sure that every single student would get to do it. And I can't remember if it was all of the math classes or all of the English classes, but they organized it to make sure every student would get to attend. Before attending, students were given a permission slip that they were required to take back home to their parents, and they were only allowed to attend the assembly if they had permission from their parents to attend the anti-harassment and bullying assembly. If they did not have the permission slip, then they got a homework study period at the library. My memory is a little vague, but I believe there was about 15 to 20 students who actually were not allowed to participate because their parents would not sign the permission slip. And now, Zach, if you could just walk us through What's in a Name, and yeah.
Wow, I don't remember any of that with the permission slips and the yeah, it's and how it all got formed with the specific drama class. I do want to have a big shout out to both Miss Demings, now Miss Keller, and Mr. Scott. Again, people who literally saved my life. Without drama, I would not have stayed in high school. It was the best years of my life because of that part of high school. So What's in a Name, the idea was to have some sort of skits or little vignettes that would kind of show this is behavior, or this is, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about anti-gay, bullying. Um, and it was also not supposed to be focused just on, LGBT issues, but just like diversity and learning about, acceptance of di- the diversity that Watsonville High is, and learning how to love and accept differences, and know how to um, make a report if something was happening to you, right? So that students felt empowered to um, seek out an administrator and who to go to. Um, so um, I believe, yeah, the students and Mr. Scott together created the programming, of the assembly. And, I've seen it a couple of times over the years since, and it's evolved a little bit into, I mean, with the times. And I'm so glad that it still happens. And it's pretty amazing, actually. And so yeah, that's kind of
I agree.
yeah.
Sorry, Zach. Yeah, I think it is really cool how it has evolved. It just to kind of, so for people who haven't gone to go see it, because it is open to the public, they have a public viewing, I think once or twice a week, after the students are view it, or the week after the students are required to view it. But just after the Me Too movement happened, a lot of the conversation and topic around harassment and individual rights, and I guess, yeah, space was addressed. So it's really cool how that program is still around, and it's still a way for students to communicate issues that they feel strongly about and that they need to advocate for, and they might not have another platform to do that for. Before I go to my last question, I wanted you to share some of the difference that you saw after What's in a Name, because there was a big shift. I know I felt it, not the first day, but the second day after the assembly. Um, it was like a weight was lifted off the entire student body. And yes, there's still some challenges, and there are still some challenges, but the overall culture, something started to happen. So if you could just share with me what that experience was like, and some of the things that you saw change.
Yeah, there really was a big shift and change, and I think it was not we were not any longer saying this is about I think the word that used to get used was tolerance. Let's tolerate each other. And really, I think the culture started to shift from let's tolerate each other to let's accept and celebrate each other. And that's really what I feel like started to shift, is that people actually started to say, oh wow, like, oh, this person's queer, like, oh, that's awesome. It was like, it was a whole different mind frame. And I even hear from, my mom, who works at a school now, that it's like she's like, she doesn't even really, the kids are so supportive of each other these days. And, she's never really seen like anti-gay bullying happening, and, she's on it. So she, and she would be on it immediately. And it's, so the culture really has shifted and thank goodness, you know, um,
I just want to say too, because well, I know both you and Besh, and I know you're not the type to take credit, but a lot of what we're seeing right now in the Watsonville community is because of the experiences that you guys had and those challenges. I hate that you had to go through that, but I am so grateful at the same time because I get to experience a lot of privileges because of it. I have a brother who came out very young and went to Watsonville High School. And when I asked him about the atmosphere, he said, "What? We run the school." So totally different. I do want to ask one more question. And then before I sign off, I'm going to invite somebody on really quickly. But I want to just go back to all of these different things that people were trying to do in order to help. And even though maybe they weren't the right things, I just want to know, well, I would like for you guys to share how that made you feel, one, and then two, what would your advice be to people now, whether it be people within our community or who are our allies, that they might be able to do better to show up for our community? Oh, sorry. Bash, why don't you start first?
So you want to know how I felt about?
Yeah, so how did you feel just like getting those special privileges? And I know that it was coming from a good place, but at the same time it can maybe be a little alienating. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the effect that that had. And then if you had any advice for anybody who wants to help now, what is that advice?
So my grades started to suffer really badly because I was just becoming um, so fed up with how I was feeling, and I would act out in class when I wasn't being supported. And so for me, any sort of support that I was able to get, whether it be drama or whether it be the GAP program, I took complete and total advantage of. I I was very happy that we had these programs starting, and I'm glad that we had those moments because, like Zach said, I mean, drama was the greatest part of our time at Watsonville High, and for me, I think I kind of I was going through so much personally that that any sort of help that I could have that I could have received, any adult that gave me an ear to speak in and to a shoulder to cry on was life-saving for me. I needed that. And so so that was my situation. And I think for what I would say to allies and those in our community today is, we've come a long way. I'm very happy about that. Um, but I feel like at this point, I think our trans brothers and sisters are the ones we need to try to support the most right now because they're kind of going through a similar kind of situation in terms of being accepted, just worldwide and society wide. I think we just need to remember everyone that came before us, um, even before I was born, helped pave the way for us all being able to be who we are. So I think, kind of educating yourself about the history of the LGBT community is really important. I think knowing that our elders all helped us get to where we are now, and situations like this right now that we're doing, spreading the message of all of our experiences helps and should be celebrated.
Thank you, Bash. Zachary, same question to you, please.
So what was the question? I'm sorry.
So no, it's okay. So I wanted to really, one big takeaway I want people to maybe take from this is how we can better service our youth in the future.
Okay, yeah.
And so I know one of the things that we talked about was how some of those attempts to help may have also done some damage, or maybe not. So if you could just share what those experiences were like for you, if they were helpful or not, and then like what can we do better, or what can our allies do to better help our community?
Well, I want to go back to just the language of special treatment or special privileges, because I don't think that I don't think it was special. I think that it was necessary and that it never should have had to be the case anyway. But so it was what was supposed to already have been occurring. So I guess what I really want to say to the youth today, and to echo what Bash said about our trans sisters and brothers, and non-binary and non-conforming folks, that I feel like, you know, they really need our continued support, um, and education for adults, you know, who hold a lot of power, you know, in making decisions about youth. But I also want to remind youth that you have a lot of power, and your voices can be very out and loud and heard, and utilize that. Um, and the other thing that I really hope, you know, if it's not already happening, um, I think, you know, queer history needs to be taught in high school or in middle school, you know, or elementary school. Let's start young, you know. Heather has two mommies, Davy has two daddies, whatever the, you know, those books are. Like, if we're really gonna like make change, we have to just normalize. I mean, we are people just like everybody else. And I hope that in 2020 we're closer to that than, you know, than we were. So I really want to see that, because you reminded me when you said, you know, about people educating themselves. Like, yes, it's important that teachers know about our history and that they teach our history, because it's an important part of world history. We have contributed very, very much to this planet, and a lot of fabulousness that deserves to be recognized.
I had to do a hair flip
Yes.
when you said fabulousness. Thank you guys both so much. I'm reminded like what happens when I surround myself with people like you, and I learn and I grow. So I've taken a lot from this conversation. So thank you. And then I have a special request. Rob, are you there? Rob Darrow, who is also a big part of putting this together, has a few words he wanted to share. Hi, Rob.
Hey, what words was I going to share?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you just you had asked to send us off. I thought. Sorry.
I'll be happy to send you off and just say that what you all have shared today is really important, and I hope other people will keep sharing that. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, George. So I'll let you finish things out.
Thank you, Rob. So with that, I just want to thank everybody who joined us on the webinar here and for making the time to learn about the history here in Watsonville and about two people who are very special to me, Zachary and Bash. I hope you get to see them around the community. Make sure to visit Bash at Faust Hair Salon once it does open in downtown Santa Cruz for all your styling needs. Had to put that plug in there for you. And I hope I'll see you guys soon.
Hey, George?
Yes.
This is Mark. It was me who wanted to say a couple of things. Do you mind?
Yes. Hi, Mark.
Sure. Thank you. Great job. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Zaman. I'm the chair of the Diversity Center in Santa Cruz County, and I just wanted to say a few words. I joined this webinar because I was interested in the history of Watsonville. It just intrigues me because of the extra challenges, you know, that might come from being in a very religious community, in a very Latino community. But I didn't expect that I would be learning a lesson in life, a real lesson in courage, and something that I never had to face as a youth. You know, the courage it took for both of you, Zach and Bash, to be your authentic self is beyond what I think many of us ever faced. You know, getting mugged, having your car spray painted, being called names, having to dress in another space in the gym, having to give up drama class. You know, I mean, not to mention the family rejection. So you must have faced those challenges and darkness from the moment you got up in the morning all the way till you fell asleep. And I'm inspired and impressed by the courage. And I'm also concerned that some of that same bullying that you experienced may still be happening today in ways that we aren't seeing, and especially like you mentioned for the trans community. So anyway, that being said, I want to repeat that you've inspired me not only as an individual, but as the chair of the Diversity Center, inspired me that it's so important that we keep our mission growing and expanding for greater impact. And if I could just add, I was in drama from the first year in middle school all the way through high school. It was my escape place to go.
So I think there might be, we might need to also start funding the arts here. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen really quick. There we go. And again, say thank you for joining us. We really appreciate any feedback that you have. We could take that feedback or provide it to us via going to www.robdaro.us. Also, if there's any stories that you would like for us to share, or articles or artifacts, also please let us know. Future webinars will be held on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. And we will see you guys again soon.
Thank you so much.